Welcome to All Systems Ergo, a human factors and ergonomics podcast delving into the fascinating world of healthcare. My name is Fran Ives and I am a chartered human factors specialist. I'm naturally curious about people, and throughout this series I want to explore different areas of healthcare human factors and the people who work in this diverse discipline. Hi everyone. Over the first few episodes we have touched upon the at times lonely nature of being a sole practitioner. I therefore wanted to speak to two such people about their experiences and also how they found moving into human factors as a second career. My two guests today are incredibly honest and share some of the highs but also some of the lows of their everyday work. Enjoy. So welcome everyone to this episode of All Systems Ergo. I'm delighted this week that we're recording in the studio, which is great because I have not one but two guests for you today. I wanted to bring together two human factors specialists who work in healthcare, but all two of my guests work in slightly different areas and have very, very different routes into human factors, which we're going to explore in the episode. So we have Siobhan Burns, who is an ergonomics and human factors advisor from University Hospitals Birmingham. And we have Jane Higgs, a doctoral researcher in human factors in healthcare from Loughborough University. So welcome to you both and thanks for joining me today.
Hi Fran.
Hi Fran.
So what I really want to do is to just delve a little bit into your backgrounds, your roots into human factors, and get a feel for what your day-to-day work looks like and involves. So the journeys that both of you took to becoming human factors specialists is quite different. So Siobhan, we'll start with you. You're an ergonomics and human factors advisor in a large NHS trust. Had that always been your goal and your aim?
Oh, definitely not. I have always been quite aimless and life just happened to me. So I started off as a healthcare assistant working in a nursing home, which continued until I injured my back and found that actually, I was told that if I continued on my path I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 25. So I sort of became interested in spinal health and ended up as a manual handling trainer. And I did that for a few years in various places before I came to University Hospitals Birmingham. And when I started there, I was under a very proactive manager who was very keen for me to progress and saw potential. And if I'm honest, I was quite resistant to begin with. So this proactive manager put me on the Loughborough postgraduate MSc course. And I did the first year. And again, I'll be completely honest here and say that I was unimpressed. I like the concept of ergonomics, but I felt that I couldn't see how it applied to my own work. And at the time, there didn't really seem to be any way for me to progress within the area that I worked. So, I felt, what was the point? And then the second year was offered to me of the course, the diploma year of the course, and again I was very resistant to it, but as I said, I have a proactive manager who pretty much told me I had no choice in the matter and that if I'd like a job I would get on the course and enjoy it. But the difference this time round was working with you, Fran. So before I started the second year of the course, I was allowed to work with side by side with Fran, and that truly opened my eyes to what good ergonomics could do for people across the trust. And I suddenly, somewhere about 3 months into the second year, I suddenly thought, oh yeah, this could definitely be a direction that I want to go in, and I finished that second part of the course, and handily enough Fran decided she was going to move on to bigger and better things, and her job became vacant and I took a punt, and here I am today. I've just finished, well, not just finished, last year I completed my MSc, so yeah, I'm still at the start of my journey, I'd say, but yeah, that's how I ended up as the Ergonomics and Human Factors Advisor for UHB.
So although you say you've just started on the journey, it's actually been quite a journey to get to that point. And I really value your honesty there by saying this wasn't something that you set out to do
Not at all.
It was something that you were sort of persuaded into by a very proactive manager who could see the potential in you and wanted to develop you in a direction that maybe you wouldn't have thought about or chosen.
No, I'd never even have considered it. I mean, to be honest, when I was put on the course, I'd never even really heard of ergonomics beyond, seeing ergonomic scissors, and you just go, oh yeah, well that's just a word they use to sell things. So no, I didn't know what any of it was. Until I was actually on the course. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly not, it wasn't something that I dreamt about when I was, lying in my bed as a child.
And Jane, I know that for you, human factors is a second career. So what was it that drew you into the profession?
Well, I'm going to see the look of horror on your face when I say it probably started when I was about 13. It's not that long a story, but that's kind of the first point. That's when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I suppose led to me spending an awful lot more time in hospitals and healthcare facilities and waiting rooms and doctors' surgeries and opticians and blah, 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 than most kids and teenagers and adults do. And there was a lot of waiting around and a lot of time to look and be interested in what was happening and stuff. And then my first degree that I did was in psychology, and I think we had 2 lectures on ergonomics, this thing that I'd never heard of before. And looking back on it, it was a bit weird because they kind of taught us more the physical side. I remember writing an essay, having done a report on the usability of 3 different pepper grinders, which was very much more physical interaction than psychological for a psychology degree. But anyway, I was interested in it, but nobody ever implied that you could do it as a career, which was a bit weird. So anyway, I went off the rails a bit and I became a librarian. The wilderness years. And I did that for about 10 years, working in a public library, and ended up basically bored and waiting to be made redundant, which was not great. So I started kind of looking back over my life and what I'd done and what I might be interested in, and recognising that I needed a new career. And I remembered these 2 ergonomics lectures and thought, oh, that was really interesting. I wonder, I wonder if that's a thing. And my first thought was I want to do something in healthcare. So somebody I knew had just had a really major operation, and while the operation went well, the aftercare was fraught with things like there wasn't a bed available, and the nurses had never heard of the operation, and she had to tell them what the operation was. And things now that we would recognise as system factors, making the recovery a lot harder. And I remember thinking at the time, surely this could be done better, but I don't really know how. And remembering the ergonomics and looking into that kind of had a eureka moment, and I realised that those 2 things could actually be combined. So yeah, I did a kind of big, I quit my job, I sold my flat, I went back to uni in my late 30s, lived in halls with someone who was young enough to be my daughter, I realised, which was really disturbing. And just did the Loughborough Masters, and it was the best year of my life. I really, really loved it. And that was what set me on the path, really.
What was it about the course then? You say that's the best year of your life.
I think it was just... I've always been interested in lots and lots of different stuff. And if there's one thing that ergonomics is, human factors is, it's bringing together lots and lots of different stuff. And the idea that if you want to, you can work, with the physical side, with the psychological side, with a more kind of social side. You can work in all different industries. And just the possibilities were really great. I really like analysing things. I've always had quite a scientific mind. So it just fitted with my personality and that feeling of helping people and talking to people, and it's a very, you feel like you're making a real difference.
Yes,
Yeah.
Completely agree with that. I mean, one of the absolute best parts of my job is going out and talking to people. I mean, I love a good talk.
Yes.
And going out and speaking to people, and sometimes it's even just letting them talk and letting them get it out, and perhaps just giving them things that are really actually very basic pointers that you can see the light bulb go on inside their head, and they go, oh yeah, oh. And that, to me, like, knowing that I've helped someone, and that even if it's only in a small way, gives me such a huge glow. It's such a lovely part of my job, and so I completely agree with you on the helping people thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it's just helping them see things from a different perspective, that sometimes you can kind of feel that they feel guilty about whatever it is, and you can just say, but look, you're a human being, and look at what happened in the run up to whatever, and look at what happens around you, and how would anybody else react in that situation? And then they have that light bulb moment, and they go, oh yeah, everybody else would have done that as well. So, and you can just feel that kind of weight lifted slightly off them, and their interest is piqued then as well, isn't it? Yeah.
So you're a sole human factors advisor, Siobhan, and you are that sole person for quite a big organisation. So how did it feel for you coming into that role, newly qualified, taking on your own service and putting your newly acquired knowledge and expertise to use?
Terrifying. I mean, absolutely terrifying. As someone who has suffered from imposter syndrome their entire life, absolutely terrifying. And I think one of the first things that I had to learn was actually where my limits lay. Because there's two different limits. There's the actual limits that my job role places on me, and it's saying, you shouldn't go beyond. So specifically, my service is aimed at musculoskeletal health. I do touch on sort of various other bits and pieces like dyslexia and things like that, but predominantly my service is musculoskeletal. And yes, having been a manual handling trainer for so many years, more years than I actually want to admit to, I feel that I had a strong grasp of musculoskeletal health and things like that, but to then suddenly be the person who is responsible for writing reports, and I always felt that my manager in the first few months wasn't actually didn't supervise me as much as I felt I needed. I mean, don't get me wrong, she did check my work and for consistency and things like that, but she always seemed happier with my work than I thought she should be. The first few months were honestly terrifying. But at the same time, I also knew, like, my own inner limits. I was probably holding myself back because I didn't believe in myself as much. And I said earlier on that I'm at the start of my journey. I mean, I'm now realising that I'm actually like 3 and a bit years into it, which for a lot of people maybe they wouldn't say that's still the start, but to me, I still feel like I'm the complete newbie. And actually, interestingly, I've recently been having people coming to me for advice, who are starting ergonomics courses and things like that, and I'm like, I don't feel qualified to give you advice. But then once I start talking to them, I realise actually, I do know what I'm talking about. This is amazing, and I have to hide my glee that I know what I'm talking about so that they don't realise that I'm full of imposter syndrome.
And Jane, I know you've also been a sole human factors specialist in an organisation. Does anything that Siobhan has said resonate with you? Absolutely.
I mean, I graduated 7 years ago now, and I'm still full of imposter syndrome. I think before I did my Ergonomics Masters, to be a librarian, I did a library and information management Masters, and I was very aware after that you learn a certain amount of stuff on your Masters course, and then you think you will know how to do the job, and then you get out into the real world, and then you have to learn how to do the job all over again. So I was quite aware that was probably going to happen when I left, and my first job on leaving, I worked for Oxford University's Patient Safety Academy, and I was brought in to do a certain project which never actually happened while I was working there. So my first job was quite disordered. It was very kind of, oh, we don't know what to do with Jane. Let's put her to help this person on their project and help this person on their project. So I was kind of supporting, but I wasn't really responsible for anything, which I suppose was quite a nice, gentle lead in, as opposed to Siobhan, who was just kind of chucked in there straight away. And then after 6 months, I came to the West Midlands Academic Health Science Network, and worked in their patient safety collaborative as their ergonomics advisor, and that's when I was the sole ergonomist. And it was certainly a bit weird suddenly being plonked in an environment where, you know, the couple of people who'd recruited me knew what ergonomics, even I can't say it, ergonomics was, but nobody else knew. Yeah. So they were like, so what are you here to do then? What is this all about? So there was kind of a little bit of a feeling of kind of justifying my existence a little bit. And also the way that my job panned out was that I took on some projects in healthcare facilities around the West Midlands, and I was kind of the Patient Safety Collaborative granted them some money and my time. So I was like a bonus ergonomist thrown in with some project money. So I got to work on several different things. So that was kind of a bit more being thrown in at the deep end, which was great because I got lots of different experience in different environments. And then I suppose when I left there, I started my own consultancy doing bits and pieces of teaching. So I was on my own again there. At that point I kind of went down to part-time because my dad was developing dementia, so I wanted to be able to help out at home more. So not having that full-time role was really useful, actually. But yes, I think being an ergonomist, most of the time you're on your own. But you don't, and you get told that at uni, and you don't really understand what it means until you're out there in the real world. And every day it seems you have a conversation with somebody about what it is and what it means, and you need to get your elevator pitch right so you can explain this vastly complicated subject in about 30 seconds.
If that.
So, yes.
And you also have to remind them that it's ergonomics, not economics.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I've been offered an internship at a financial institution when I was at uni, a careers place. Like, no, you don't understand. And the blank look this poor woman gave me. So I was trying to explain. She was like, no, this is not for you.
the sort of I'm going to call it an issue. It's not an issue. It's a fact, isn't it? That we're often sole practitioners. But this has come up in other conversations that I've had with people, including the episode with Ken Catchpole over in America, and the situation in America is very similar. And we had quite a conversation about what could we or do we need to do to actually support these people who are sole practitioners in a healthcare organisation. Is there anything that either of you think we could or should be doing to best support or better support people in these roles?
I think the thing that's most helped me is just, I hate the word networking, trying to network as much as possible, trying to talk to lots of different people, trying to attend conferences and go to webinars and stuff. Now there's so much online. You can go along, find something that interests you. There's a lot of healthcare stuff online. The Chartered Institute groups and things are great. And kind of once you see the same faces popping up, and once people start to maybe talk about what they do, quite often you think, oh, they've got that expertise, maybe I can talk to them about that. And just realising that everybody is, almost everybody is a sole practitioner, so almost everybody is in the same boat. Everybody is really helpful. Everybody will quite happily give you their email address or their phone number or whatever, and so that you can bounce ideas off them. And I always felt, to start with, really self-conscious asking people for help, because I thought people might think I was saying, oh, can you come and do this project with me, or that I might be asking them for hours and hours of chat or something. But sometimes it's just people who've done a similar project before. You explain what you're trying to do and they say, oh, well, when I did this, I did X, Y and Z, and you think, oh, yes, that's what I can do. And it's just not quite chance conversations, but almost chance meetings. But you have to kind of put yourself out there and be prepared to say, I don't know. And that's really intimidating sometimes, especially when you're really afraid of saying, I don't know, and you don't want to look like a twit or an imposter. But you just have to recognise that a lot of the time, once I've said I don't know, other people have gone, yes, I've never understood that either.
And you get that feeling of reassurance,
yes.
actually.
Like, oh, well, I haven't gained any knowledge, but I'm glad that I'm not the only one.
That in itself can be reassuring sometimes, can't it? Yeah.
And also, I think the idea that once you've left uni, you feel like, right, that phase is over with. But obviously it's a bit different for me because I'm doing a PhD at Loughborough, so I've kind of gone back. But I always felt like my old lecturers, a lot of them pop up on the circuit anyway. So if you wanted to ask them a question, I've always felt like they might be available to just, email and say, I'm doing this, what kind of methodology? Or I think I should do this kind of methodology. What do you reckon? Just a quick 10-second email kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
it's really being open to making contacts and connections with people, but also not being afraid to put your hand up and say you don't understand something, and actually recognising that the human factors world is quite a small world. If
you ask what you think is the stupid question, most people won't think it's a stupid question.
Well, I often say to people that one of the great things about being a human factors specialist is that you almost have permission to ask the stupid questions, because certainly for me, when I came into healthcare, I knew very little about healthcare, and it sort of gave me that confidence that I'm not from a physio background or nursing or medicine, so why should I know about a particular procedure in endoscopy or how a theatre runs, and actually it's okay to say, could you explain a little bit more?
That was definitely a hard step for me. So being a manual handling trainer, I'd spent all of my days acting like I knew everything, so I was the expert in the room, therefore, I knew everything, even if I didn't. And I've always been quite good at talking until people believe that I know what I'm talking about. I won't use the word that I'd normally use, but that's what I am. So basically, actually admitting that I didn't understand the process of something when I was doing an assessment, I realised I had to actually stop myself from, when someone would make a comment, instead of just going, and pretending I understood it, it was actually stopping myself and going, no, you don't understand that. Come on, you need to understand why they're actually telling you this information. So that was definitely something that I had to learn very quickly when I started in this role, and it's definitely one of the harder things to do. And I think depending on the circumstances, particularly circumstances where I'm likely to see people again, so in an assessment circumstance, I'm probably only ever going to see that person one more time or maybe twice more. So essentially, as much as I want to give them a good interaction, it doesn't really matter to me. Whereas in situations like going to conferences and things like that, I'm probably going to see these people again multiple times, and I become very socially inept in those situations, and I feel like I can't speak. And instead of actually getting the information that I want, I just stand in the background going, oh yes, very good, and being quiet. And I think one of the other things was coming into the trust after having had such a good ergonomist before me. I realised that I was stepping into very big shoes, and people across the trust knew they could trust Fran, and they knew that she would find answers for them, and that definitely was a real thing for me, because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And actually taking the time to say to somebody, I'm sorry, actually, I don't know at this point, but I am going to go and do a bit of research and I'm going to get back to you. And yeah, again, that was a hard thing to say. I don't know.
Yeah, it's quite a brave thing to say when you're feeling like you're trying to prove yourself in a new role, proving yourself to your colleagues, but also to yourself as well in some respect. But I think the asking why questions and taking time to understand is one of the most important things to do.
I was just going to say that I think what Siobhan was saying about you're kind of expected to know how people do their job if you work in that environment, that is quite intimidating. And I think the thing about human factors that is great for me is that you can say things like, right, so I understand there's a process to what you do, but everybody does things in slightly different ways. So can you show me how you do it? And, say, I'm really interested in how you do it because everybody does it in slightly different ways. You'll probably do some bits better than other people. So I'm really interested to learn. And then you're kind of like saying to them, teach me, tell me how you're the expert. And they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And also, having worked, I've realised when I worked in several different hospitals on different projects at the same time, how one hospital runs, how one department of one hospital runs is completely different to how another hospital or even, the next ward down the corridor runs. So asking over and over and over again, I feel a bit silly doing that after a while, because you're like, oh, I'm asking the same questions. And then you realise you're asking completely different people the same questions. So the only person who knows that you're asking the same questions is you. So, it's easier once you have that, you're able to kind of step back from it and have that kind of insight into it. But it's still quite intimidating, I think.
And you are so right. I mean, I've only ever worked in healthcare, so I can't speak about other industries, but you talk about even between different departments, but even between different shifts, things can change, because it can depend on the manager and how. So the manager of this shift is very observant and watches their staff very closely and makes sure that they follow policy. And then the manager of the next shift actually is a bit more laid back and perhaps, as long as the job gets done, that's fine. And so you see different practices happening on that shift than you would have done 12 hours before, because there's less supervision, or there's less, less supervision, less interference in the way that people choose to do their work.
So how do you adapt then, Siobhan, to the different characters, the different people and the ways of working that you see? Because what can often happen, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, is you can go to a complete range of different areas, even in one single day, to talk to different levels of staff, different grades, different specialities. Some may understand what you do, some people may have no clue at all, and may actually be slightly suspicious of you and what you're aiming to do by coming into their department, asking to watch what they're doing and asking them to explain their role. How do you How do you gain the trust of people and help them to understand your purpose to get the best out of that visit?
I'm definitely a bit of a chameleon, so you put the face on that you know the person wants to see. So I quite often take my cues from the person that I go to see. And you're quite right that in some situations the person that I'm going to see is actually quite resistant, and perhaps they've been referred by their manager and they don't understand why I'm there. So in those situations, the first thing that I do is to try and put the person at their ease and actually make them, you know, one of my statements is, I'm here for you, because quite often staff members that are worried think that I've come from HR and I'm here to help get rid of them. And quite often, certainly with the very complex cases, these people have had a very bad experience with people like me coming in and making statements about them and about their job role and about the way that they do their job. So I'm always very careful to actually make them realise that I'm there for them and that I see my role as improving their lives, not making it worse. You know, and then you'll get perhaps more senior staff members whose time is very precious, and you realise that actually that hour and a half conversation that you might have with someone else needs to be a 20-minute conversation with this person, because all they want you to do is to take the pertinent details and give them a recommendation and make their lives better. And that's fine. You know, I think it's about reading the situation, so you have got to be quite fluid in your approach, and you've got to be able to see when someone is uncomfortable with your approach as well. So I'm quite, I know Fran will agree with me here that I'm not a touchy-feely person at all. And sometimes I've had to push myself out of my comfort zone to actually be a bit more physically welcoming to people. And I have to say that I think one of the first things that disarms people, and this has definitely been a problem during the height of COVID, is a good big smile. So I go in absolutely grinning my head off to people, because I think it's so much harder to be nasty to someone when they come in being polite to you and smiling really hard.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've definitely gone home at the end of the day and not been able to smile at my other half because I've used all the smiles up. And I've probably used all the talk up as well. So he knows quite often that actually, yeah, I'm just going to leave her in the corner to be quiet and miserable, and probably a bit later on she might be able to speak. So yeah, I think it's being flexible in your approach and actually knowing that one approach doesn't cover all. One size does not fit all in this industry. You've got to have the ability to read the room and react in the way that suits those individuals on the day. And also knowing that you are possibly seeing someone at the hardest time of their life. You know, and for a lot of people, I find that they've had a whole conglomeration of events happen. It's not just the physical issue that they're dealing with. You know, as I said, I'm predominantly musculoskeletal, so perhaps I'm going in to see someone with back pain. But actually, why have they got back pain? It's because their mother is in hospital dying, and their husband's left them, and their childcare is all over the place, and they've still got to come to work, and it's really awful and everything's tense, and actually part of that's causing the problem. And me going in like a bull at a gate is not going to help them. You've got to actually understand how all of their circumstances, not just the physical aspect, is affecting them. And some people will tell you these details, and some people you go and see and then you walk away and think, I only got half the story there. But if that's what they feel comfortable giving you, you have to accept that that's what you get from them.
Yeah. I think you made a really good point there when you said I use up all my smiles. I definitely find that, you know, if I'm data collecting on a ward or something and you're interacting with lots of different people, as you say, you have to interact with them in the way that they are comfortable with. So you're changing your personality a bit and bringing out different parts of your personality and stuff. And it's quite draining, and because you're really concentrating, you're trying to get the information out of them, but you're trying to relate to them as well in a way that's maybe not comfortable for you, and you're trying to kind of keep in the back of your mind that there's somebody else on the ward over there that you need to speak to in 5 minutes before they leave, but you need to get this information out of this other person first without sounding abrupt. And it takes such concentration and such effort that sometimes, you get to your lunch break or when you go home at the end of the day, and I've just kind of sat in the car at the end of the day in the car park going, I'm not going to start driving that yet. I'm just going to take 10 minutes and just scroll through Facebook on my phone or do something completely mindless that is just like I don't have to concentrate on anything for a few minutes, just to kind of decompress slightly, because it does take it out of you. Yeah.
And was that something that surprised both of you, this other side of the role that maybe you were or weren't prepped for? Did you sort of think, oh gosh, I hadn't expected that? Or did you feel that your training had prepared you for that sort of more emotional side?
Oh, the training did not in any way begin to prepare me for the emotional drain that this job is like. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. I honestly look forward to coming to work, which is not something that I could ever have said before I worked in this role. I did a job before. Nothing wrong with it, but I did just do a job, come in, go home. And now, the emotional drain is almost... it's really hard to describe it, because sometimes I do go home and just think, I just can't take a single like another negative emotion. But at the same time, it's still really fulfilling, because you realise that I did help that person, even though I feel like this now. I helped that person, and and getting feedback from people that you've helped also assists. And I've completely lost my train of thought now, so I don't know what I was saying. Yes.
Yeah, but I agree, and as an ergonomist, you're there to solve problems. So the people you go to see are in distress or cross or annoyed or tired or all of the above. So you do get a lot of negative emotions. And, when you said about does the training prepare you for that, my brain just went back to, the lecture room at university and them going, right, so this is how you write questionnaire questions, and this is how you decide what to ask people in interviews, and blah, blah, blah. And it's great. You've got to learn how to do that stuff and how to structure it and how to get the information out of people. But I don't think at any point anybody said, and you might be in really emotional situations. I suppose, when you're doing an ergonomics degree, they're catering for across all the industries. So you probably have fewer emotional interviews in, I don't know, a nuclear power plant when somebody needs their display screen redesigned or whatever, than you do with somebody in a healthcare scenario who's just at the end of a 12-hour shift or whatever. So you have to get into it to really understand. And again, like Siobhan, I absolutely love ergonomics and doing my jobs, and I wouldn't swap it for the world. But especially if you take on other people's emotions, you just have to learn your own little ways of how to get over that, and also realise that you, as Siobhan said, you've helped to make their life better. So you've seen them at the worst ebb, and hopefully what you've done has brought them out of that a bit. You talking then just brought back to mind one of the days I had a couple of weeks ago, and I did 3 assessments on the bounce. And I went from one to the next, and each one they were crying, and it was a very intense experience. And each of the 3 stories were completely different, but all very harrowing in their own way. And I'm also trying to extract the information that I need from them to actually
give a viable report without making them feel rushed, while also thinking I've got to be with this person, the next person, in half an hour or 15 minutes, and I've still got to get there, and how am I going to do that without saying to this person, right, you've just got to stop crying now because we're done.
Yeah.
And then I finished those 3 assessments, and I went back to the office and I sat down in the chair to start writing reports. And I just thought, I just can't. And my brain was just churning with all of these emotions and thinking about these poor people's stories and things like that. And I think that I'm very emotionally resilient. Generally, I think I'm pretty good at listening to people without taking it on myself. But sometimes, you know, and that is never brought up. Emotional resilience as an ergonomist is never brought up in the learning process.
This is how you collect your data.
Yeah.
It sounds very, very sterile, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's just not like that, really. And the other thing that I find quite draining, so I spend a lot of my time trying to be very welcoming and telling people, always email me if you need to speak to me, call me, I'm always happy to speak to you. If you see me in the corridor, stop me and I'll speak to you. And I mean, one of the things that a colleague said to me the other day was like, why does everybody stop you for directions? She's like, there can be 6 different staff members in the corridor, but the person will look at you and stop you and ask you for directions. Why is that? I'm like, I don't know. I think it's because I make eye contact with people, and I try and look open and friendly. I mean, maybe there's sometimes when I walk around looking a bit more miserable because I don't want people to speak to me because I haven't got time. But sometimes people will stop me or come to my desk and speak to me at my desk, and inside I'm just thinking, please go away, I just don't have time for this. But you've just still got to go, hi, how can I help you?
Yes. And that's part of like being the sole practitioner, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you can't say, I'm really sorry, I'm really busy, can you talk to my colleague? Because it's just you.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes back round to, you know, the pressures of being the sole practitioner, really. Yeah.
And not being prepared necessarily before you start.
Yeah.
And Jane, you sort of moved away in the last year or so from being a sole practitioner into a research role. So what was it that influenced your decision to move into research?
I think it was something that I always quite fancied doing. You know, I won't lie, the idea of people calling me doctor is just attractive and hilarious at the same time. I have to say, I'm not like, oh, I deserve to be called doctor. I just think being called Dr. Jane would be just hilarious. But just the luxury, I suppose, of being able to choose your own topic and spend a massive amount of time on it just sounded great. And it is great, but it's a lot of hard work. And, you know, you say you've moved away from being a sole practitioner. You're kind of almost more of a sole practitioner when you're doing a PhD, because you've come up with the idea, you've got to sort out every single little bit of it. I mean, you've got your supervisors to back you up, but it's not like when you're a master's student and you can go, well, how do I do this and this and that? Because they'll be like, well, you're a PhD student, go and find out. Not, you know, maybe quite that boldly, but, you know, you're learning how to be a researcher, so you've got to learn yourself a lot. So it is kind of like being a sole practitioner. Without maybe the background of people saying, what is ergonomics to you every 20 minutes? So you are more kind of in that environment where people know what you're talking about and stuff. And it is different to being in a workplace in that you are doing your own piece of work, but the work that the people around you are doing is related more. So you can have those kind of wider conversations about what they're doing and stuff. And it, you relate more about to what each other's doing. So it's great, yes. And you can kind of see things moving forward and see people pushing boundaries and stuff. Yeah.
I hadn't really sort of considered you still being a sole practitioner, but actually when you explain it, you absolutely are, because your research is your research. On a master's course, everyone will be doing the same modules and the same assignments, so you can have that peer-to-peer support.
Yeah, and I think it was a bit of a shock. I knew it would be different to being on a master's course. And COVID got in the way as well, of course, because I was expecting to, get a place on a PhD. Well, I wasn't expecting to, but I was very thankful to get a place on a PhD. And I was expecting to be able to go into the uni and, work in a communal room and everybody be chatting to each other and stuff. And even if you were doing, not like on a master's course, you'd be all doing the same assignment or the same piece of group work or whatever. You'd all be doing different work, but you'd have that social aspect. And I didn't have that, certainly to start with. So it has been very different.
Yeah.
Certainly working at home.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I suppose has been the same for a lot of people.
And of course, Siobhan, you started your role right at the beginning of COVID in 2020.
1st of March 2020, my first day in this role. Yeah, it was very strange wandering around the NEC when there's no people there and getting all the IT, the workstations set up for them and, saying, yep, I know we're in an emergency situation, but that still doesn't mean that we can put a PC on a trestle table that's going to just collapse when someone breathes on it too heavily. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting experience, and I think nobody else knew what was going on. I think almost in a way, I've always said to other people that it was a baptism of fire, but I think I probably got off a bit easier because all of my assessments went away for a bit because everybody was too busy coping with COVID. And a lot of people who would have assessments went home and perhaps weren't working as much at home, so they weren't developing the same sort of issues. So it was a very strange time. And I don't know, because I can't live it again and do it differently, I'll never know. But I do think that perhaps actually, rather than being a baptism of fire, it was a bit weird. But perhaps it was a gentler start to my role than I would have had otherwise if we hadn't been going through that.
Do you think it gave you time and the opportunity to shape the role to you without having to immediately step into someone else's shoes?
Yes, I think so. And again, coming back to being the person filling your shoes, and I know you pulled a face when I first said that, but you had got such a reputation across trust, and I was just this person that's come in and I've got to replace Fran, and everybody's telling me how great Fran was, and I know Fran was great. But having everybody tell me that did put a lot more pressure on me. But at the same time, Fran's never done this. Fran's never done COVID. Fran's never set up home working procedures and things like that. So in a way, I was able to put my stamp on the job without any comparison, which was quite nice. And I think, as much as COVID was a bad thing for the country and the NHS as a whole, for me, perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it was actually something that just was a bit different and gave me different options and actually allowed me to feel more comfortable in the role than I would have done otherwise.
So you've both talked really honestly and openly about some of the real highlights and positives of a career in human factors, but also really identified some of the challenges as well. What has really surprised you about a career in human factors? It's the fact that the people say so often, help me.
and they don't know how they want to be helped. They just want to be helped. So we go, okay, here's my help. And then they go, oh, I didn't want that sort of help. And I'm like, oh, you know, and I think that actually has surprised me how often I go in with the best of intentions and I go in and do what I think is my absolute best job. And then certainly management is more likely to react that way. I feel like the individuals are generally very thankful for what I do, but I do sometimes think that the bigger projects or the projects where there's more management involvement, that actually I'm not doing what they wanted me to do, and I won't be manipulated into doing what they want me to do in a lot of situations. So that definitely surprised me.
And do you think that's down to a lack of understanding of what ergonomics and human factors is, but also what it can do as well as what it can't?
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. And I think sometimes people have got an idea in their head of what I'm going to come in and do, and then I don't do that because that isn't a good ergonomic solution. You know, this has come from somebody who doesn't, they've got this idea in their head, but they don't actually understand what good ergonomics are. And there's definitely some issues there.
And what surprised you, Jane?
I think kind of slightly linked to that, you try and describe what ergonomics is to people, and sometimes people think, oh, well, that sounds like common sense. So like when you say you come up with a different solution to what they expect, they're like, oh, that's really interesting, I'm dealing with something different here. But I think the most surprising thing to me has been, I think when I said that my master's course was the best year of my life, it was because that ergonomics and that systems way of thinking and everything, that's how my brain works. And I'm a very details person, and I like looking into things, and I'm curious, and I like looking in all different directions, and I'm interested in everything, and I'm into everything. So that kind of really fits in with an ergonomic systems way of thinking. And I've always assumed, I mean, everybody does to a certain extent, I'm sure, you don't really think about it, that the way that your brain works is the way that everybody else's brain works to a certain extent. But you come out, and even as a newly qualified master's student, you know, graduating with no work experience, you start talking to people and immediately you can see them going, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I'd never thought about it like that. And there was certainly one project that I worked on at Birmingham Children's Hospital where I still talk to them about the project, and we kind of broadcast the changes we made to other people. And every time they talk about the project, they will say, Jane came in with her completely different way of thinking. Completely different point of view, and I think that's partly because of how my brain works and how I've been trained as an ergonomist, but partly it's that strength of being able to go into a situation, go into other people's workplaces where they've done those things like that for weeks, months, years, decades, and have that outside pair of eyes. And for me, it's just really fascinating because you get to go into all these different places. And, you know, the first time I observed an operation, a surgical operation, I was like, oh, this is so exciting. Oh, my goodness, I would never have got to do this.
That was a very different reaction to the first time I saw an operation.
Oh, dear, was it?
Mine was more grey-faced and slide down the wall.
I was scared that that's what mine would be. Instead, I was like, oh, look, you can see inside that person's neck. And it was just exciting. And sometimes when you describe it, it sounds quite dry, but it was really exciting. And you get to go into places that you would never go into. And just by bringing that different perspective, you can start to help.
I think one of the things, I don't know about surprising, but disappointing, was that sometimes I will go into a workplace and I'll come up with what I think is a really good solution, and I'm really pleased with that solution and I'm really proud of it, and I present it to the manager and they go, yeah, I don't think so. And I'm like, oh no. And it's like someone's stamping on my kitten or something.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
no, don't do that. That's a really good idea. And that can definitely be a bit disappointing. And again, I don't think they prepare you for that at uni either.
Yes.
So you've mentioned a few times some things that you weren't prepared for. So as a final sort of question then, you know, if somebody's listening to this who is either considering a career in human factors or is just about to qualify and is about to go out and embark on their first role, what would you give them as a piece of advice to help prepare them for both the highs and lows of being a human factors specialist?
Oh, difficult one. A thick skin. I think you do have to understand that people aren't always going to understand what you're talking about. And I mean, really, I'd say you've got to learn to be flexible.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn to tailor your approach to the feedback that you're getting off the person. I mean, I'm obviously thinking about very much going out and meeting people and that side of ergonomics. But yeah, being prepared to be knocked back and understanding. I think, it's not personal. That's actually something that I've had to say to myself quite a lot. It's not personal. It's just they either don't understand the idea or it's too expensive for them to want to understand the idea. So yeah, I don't know if that's giving them anything, but just saying to them actually when things don't go quite the way you want it to, it's not personal, but just enjoy the highs when you get them because they are so good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd just say go for it, give it a go. And there are so many different avenues that you can go down as a human factors expert. You can find your own niche, I think, whether that's industry-wise or specialism-wise or whatever. There are very few jobs, I would think, that you can work in so many different industries or academia, or you can, set up your own consultancy, do whatever you like, be a teacher, whatever. There are so many different avenues that you can go down. And I would say if you're a people person and you're interested in people and how they tick, go for it, because it's just fascinating.
Well, you've sold it to me.
It's just as well.
Thank you both for your time today. You've been incredibly open and honest about your experiences, and hopefully it will have inspired some people, or at least given some of our listeners something to reflect on. So thank you both.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Siobhan and Jane. I particularly valued their honesty, and although they both identified challenges, what I felt from both of them was a real passion for their subject and for what they do. So I hope this has given some food for thought and is particularly useful to those who are either new to the profession or those who are thinking about setting down this path. Thanks for listening.